Greetings, and thank you for joining this session entitled Interdisciplinary Strategies for Cultivating Peace, Justice, Democracy, and Development. As we get started, I would like to share a little bit about me with you. My name is Dr. Felicia Tuggle, and I'm an assistant professor at Auburn University, which is located in the Southeast region of the United States. My practice background is in community practice and organizational capacity building. My teaching interests really center around interprofessional education and collaborative practice and international social work. And my research interests kind of dovetail with my practice and teaching interests, in that I am really interested and conduct research around campus community partnerships, specifically as it relates to international social work and the role of NGOs in fostering community development and civic engagement. So our session objectives today, I want to really highlight the interconnectedness between the disciplines of social work and nonprofit leadership or civil society, which is interesting because in the US, nonprofit leadership is a very popular and common discipline in academia or higher ed. However, typically in West African contexts that I will be speaking on, this is not the case. There are no institutions of higher learning or post-secondary institutions that really offer degree programs or certificate programs in nonprofit leadership. I also want to outline the complementary mission and values between the disciplines of social work and nonprofit leadership that really inform this challenging inequality through civil society, research, and curriculum development project. And then lastly, I will spend some time discussing the applied research methodology that was used, core curriculum components, as well as key findings for this project. So globally, the lack of engagement between citizens and their government has resulted in desperate policies and resources, as well as services that just fail to address citizens' needs. They often favor those who already have power as well. And this becomes a fundamental driver of inequality. So when we think about the interconnectedness between social work and nonprofit leadership, or we can also think of the term civil society and NGOs, there is an increasingly call for an emphasis on dialogue and action concerning issues of social justice within college and university classrooms, as well as among NGOs, so out in the practice community. Now, for us as social workers, social justice is a core value of the social work discipline, and it is integral to social work education as well. When it comes to the field of nonprofit leadership, which is often embedded in political science programs, it's viewed as a focus for liberation, empowerment, social justice, because these nonprofit organizations often are the ones providing the critically needed services to the vulnerable populations, and they give a voice to marginalized populations. Within both social work education and nonprofit leadership, there's a need for returned focus to the core social justice, advocacy, mobilization roles that are associated with our respective disciplines, social work, as well as civil society in the nonprofit sector. And this is needed in order to help us initiate the systemic change that really leads to reduce inequality. And we know that within civil society, within these NGOs, this is where most of our micro and macro social work is practiced, specifically, both in developing countries in the global South, as well as, countries in the global North. So in the spirit of Ubuntu and Harambe, this project leverages the interconnectedness between two disciplines and utilizes the synergy to enhance solidarity. So quickly, I'll just highlight some of the complementary components of the mission and values between social work and nonprofit leadership. So when we look at social work, we see here our mission is to enhance human well-being and help meet basic needs of all people, with a particular attention to the needs and empowerment of people who are vulnerable, oppressed, and living in poverty. Well, when we come over and look at the mission of nonprofit leadership, we see very similar concepts: to improve civil society and human life by connecting poor or marginalized people with groups that can mobilize support to help them. And so when we look at these two missions, we see we're both interested in human well-being and human life. We're both focused on working with poor, marginalized, vulnerable, oppressed individuals or communities. And then when we look at our core values, we see that service, social justice, dignity and worth of a person, importance of human relationships, integrity and competence. And over in nonprofit, we see very similar values come forward: trust, stewardship. Again, we see service, volunteerism, civic engagement, shared good, freedom of association, and again, social justice. This is a common theme between both disciplines. So now I'm going to transition and briefly talk about our research methodology for this project. So the research methodology was grounded in community-based participatory research. Our first step was we conducted focus groups with BSW level social work students at African Methodist Episcopal University in Monrovia, Liberia. And these focus groups really just focused on assessing their knowledge and skills and experiences with how they had either applied or observed concepts like advocacy, community mobilization, and social justice in practice. We also conducted focus groups with a diverse group of civil society leaders representing different sectors: health, education, higher ed, like there were just the religious community, like there were faith community. There were a lot of different sectors represented in that focus group. And then after we conducted the focus groups, we implemented the challenging inequality through civil society curriculum, which is really a capacity building training, so that we could help build the capacity of these social work students and civil society leaders to apply advocacy, community mobilization, and social justice practices into their practice. And then lastly, we collected, and we're still in the process of finalizing the analysis of the results of our formative process and outcome evaluation. Real quickly, the curriculum, the challenging inequality through civil society curriculum consists of 5 modules. It starts with an introduction. Then we outline and really define what these concepts are. Next, we delve a little bit deeper with some more examples and kind of talk about the importance of why these things are important in promoting democracy and peace and justice and equity. And then we spend a bulk of time allowing participants to actually practice some of the skills that are being taught within the curriculum and working collectively and collaboratively to do that. And then the 5th module ends with teaching participants how to develop a monitoring and evaluation plan. So how do you really evaluate some of these advocacy and community mobilization activities that you're doing that really advance and help promote social justice? So I'll highlight a few project findings. So this is a group of civil society leaders and social work students at AME working together. And some of the things that emerged between the focus groups and the evaluation of the training was that students and civil society leaders, they seem to understand concepts around advocacy, community mobilization, and social justice. But prior to the training, many of them reported in the focus groups that they felt like they lacked the skills to really apply these concepts in practice. With so many existing inequalities, civil society leaders and students often struggle with selecting specific advocacy issue to mobilize around. And this caused a little drift and made it harder for them to gain traction because they may have started on one issue and moved to another issue. And so that's something that they're now more mindful of. Many of the civil society leaders had not considered how the mission of their agency actually even aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals. And then they also talked about the lack of access to data could sometimes make it difficult for them to try to use evidence-based messaging when communicating to different stakeholders. So other feedback really quickly from participants. So one participant said, I now understand the importance and value of aligning our agency mission with the SDGs. A participant from civil society reported or shared that learning about data mapping and how we can use tools like Mopea and Kobo to collect data and help mobilize community member was my favorite part of the training. A social work student said, as a social work student, I knew we did field placements in NGOs, but I never considered their important role civil society leaders play in promoting social justice and advancing the sustainable development goals. And then another student said, I love learning about so many local NGOs in the community that I never knew about. I now want to do my field placement with Accountability and Transparency Lab. And so in closing, our next steps are to continue our collaboration with African Methodist Episcopal University, or AMEU, so that we can co-develop and implement a contextually appropriate nonprofit management and education curriculum for Liberian NGOs that help build the capacity of the sector to further facilitate sustainable development, as well as democracy and the peaceful rule of law. We also want to conduct and co-publish joint research on the interdisciplinary approaches social work educators, practitioners, and civil society leaders are using to advance sustainable development. And then we want to scale this challenging inequality through civil society training in other West African countries facing similar challenges, but that also offer us similar opportunities. And so at this time, I'll take any questions that you might have or comments regarding this presentation. Thank you again for your participation and taking time to enjoy this presentation. I certainly appreciate it.